Welcome to In Such Tilincuicatl. My name is Andrea Martinez.
My name is Andrea Celeste.
And today we have a very special guest. We are interviewing Hans-Georg Moeller. Hans-Georg Moeller is a professor in philosophy in the University of Macau. He's also taught in Canada and in Ireland. He's written several books. His last one was co-written with Paul D'Ambrosio, Genuine Pretending. And the upcoming one, which will be published by the time the interview comes out, is You and Your Profile, also co-written with Paul D'Ambrosio. And we're going to talk to him today about his upcoming book,
which touches plenty of the subjects we've been talking about in the past episodes. So we hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Welcome, Georg, to In Such Tilincuicatl.
Thank you very much to Inject Your Spectacle.
It's an honor to have you, and thank you for agreeing to the interview. So by the time this interview comes out, the book will already be published.
Yes.
You and Your Profile, by Hans-Georg Moeller and Paul D'Ambrosio.
Right.
And so can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So the subtitle of the book is Identity After Authenticity. So it's basically about basic idea of the book is to introduce three types of identity. And the first type is we call sincerity, which is a role-based identity. So people identify, for instance, through their family roles. There's like an older type of identity, a traditional type, right? Old family values, religious kind of roles, and this kind of thing. And then there's a new modern kind of Western type of identity, authenticity, which usually people like the three of us are still kind of familiar with, right? Instead, we define ourselves not so much through commitment to roles, but we try to kind of create or discover our real self, right? The originality, uniqueness, and this kind of model of authenticity dominates. I'm trying to be like Zizek here a little bit. No, I don't know why I have this itchy nose anyways. So this is like this authenticity kind of thing that you have to be original and unique, and there's a whole language about it and a whole ideology, but it also, we internalize it, I think, right? We grew up in this kind of authenticity culture. Philosopher Charles Taylor called it the age of authenticity. Now, the main point of the book is that, as the subtitle says, identity after authenticity, that authenticity is coming at its end, and that we've basically already transitioning, and to a large part even have transitioned to a third identity mode or identity technology, and that's profile-based identity. So we project profiles, for instance, on social media, which is the most obvious example. But actually, we think this goes back before social media and before the internet, so it has a longer history. And so that nowadays, and I mean, somehow we're doing the same thing right now, right? Because we're recording this show here, this interview, and then will be projected to an audience which we don't really know. And then, so we're also doing kind of profile work right now. We're building our identity. That's the reason. It's part of, even this interview is part of identity building for all of us, three of us who are involved here. And inevitably, what we are doing, and then we're posting it and so forth, that's we thereby build a sort of profile identity. And so we're trying, in the book, we're trying to both describe this. The book is basically two different methodologies. Like the fun part is kind of describing how this profile building is visible, in all kinds of daily life. In tourism, we have a few chapters on how people travel today, or then of course social media, but then also in politics or in advertising and things like this. And then another segment of the book is trying to give a kind of a theoretical account of what distinguishes profile identity from sincere identity and from authentic identity. And then actually there are one or two other, sorry for speaking so long, I mean, just two more things. Then the book also includes a general kind of theoretical reflection on what identity is. And then lastly, in the last chapter, which is influenced by Daoism, we use our old notion of genuine pretending, which is the previous book that Paul and I wrote, which is on the philosophy of the Zhuangzi. And we suggest to embrace genuine pretending in order to cope with the pressures of identity building, and specifically with the pressures of the world of prophylicity within we now live and exist.
And you've done your own kind of exploration through of this, like not just academically, but in social media through your channel of Carefree Wandering, where you explained a lot of the concepts that are in your book about sincerity and prophylicity and authenticity. And I have a few questions. Well, we have a few questions about these three, you call them in one of your videos, tools of identity. And I guess my first question would be, obviously we haven't discarded or stopped using authenticity. And so my question is, do we obviously still use these modes of identity in different ways in our modern life? And in which aspects would you say we still try to be sincere and authentic?
Yeah, good question. I mean, many social contexts, sincerity is still important. One is family, obviously, right? As I mentioned earlier, like parenthood, for instance, right? And the idea that, you know, we have to commit to whatever, being a mother or so, no matter how progressive you are, that is a very strong social demand, right? And it's even like a legal obligation and so forth. And then, of course, other areas I like to point always to the military, or you can think about Mexico organized crime, right? Where there's a strong kind of, wherever there's a culture of honesty. A clan, yeah, but anywhere there's where it's very strong group solidarity, where the basis of the culture and the basis of the structure to survive is commitment to group solidarity, right? The worst thing you can do if you're in a gang is snitching or so, right?
Exactly.
So these are all sincerity values. This is all part of an ethics of sincerity, right? You must lie. You can't snitch, right? So you cannot be your authentic self, or so you need to be like totally committed to the role you have in the group, within the group. So military and criminal gang is kind of also related, obviously, to military, right? These are all today's context. Of course, religious groups still, right? Similarly, the family. So these are all education to a certain extent, but in education also authenticity is of course very important. So yeah, there's a lot of areas in society where sincerity is still well and alive.
I would have a question regarding an intermediary question regarding authenticity and sincerity, because now that you bring gangs to the table, for instance, and religious groups, is there a relationship between democracy and monarchic or absolute mindsets involving these two? Because it would sort of seem so.
Yes, that's a very good point. And yes, of course, authenticity is much more democratic because it's focused on the individual. So it goes along with the idea that society is constituted by individuals, which has a lot to do with, you know, modern idea of democracy, right? One person, one vote, right? That's very much an individualistic approach towards politics. And that relies heavily on the notion that identity and is individual, and in turn that society consists of individuals, right? And I think prophylicity to an extent is even more democratic. It's kind of democracy kind of reloaded, democracy 2.0 or so, right?
Is it democracy though? I don't know. Because the world itself, I mean, we are hearing around the world in the crisis of democracy. And while I've been also watching your videos and thinking of imagining what else is prophelicity before reading the book, uh, I I couldn't help but wonder this, to make this link, like, is this democracy reloaded, as you call it, or is this like it's doppelganger, evil twin? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say evil twin because I don't want to go into Manichaeism as well, but you know, a doppelganger, I would just
Yes,
leave it
that's
at
a very good
that.
point, Andrea. I appreciate that. It's a good idea. I didn't think of it in this way. I think somehow that in prophelicity, you know, the ideology part is kind of being superseded by something else, right? Traditionally, politics, and this is like, these are elements of sincerity that were still very strong in politics, that politics had a lot to do with class, also like religion also, right? Certain parties were closer to the Catholic Church and others were non-religious, and then others saw themselves as more like working class oriented and based in the working class, and then you have the other parties that are still like more the old aristocracy or whatever, you know, the capitalists. And this in prophelicity, this all is like authenticity, as you said, like a kind of a doppelganger of it. It's even kind of more, how to say, everything is just it's just a projection that is no longer grounded in either an authentic or a sincere a form of identity, right? So it's just a play of images, of positioning yourself, of constructing certain profiles, and so in this sense, it's kind of even more democratic, I would say.
I think in one of your videos, you spoke of Barack Obama as being one of the first political candidates to exploit prophelicity, where Obama presented himself as this, like, you know, very liberal, very open-minded, friendly kind of guy. And then his policies were actually quite hawkish and like, you know, it didn't really carry out the changes that he promised. And so
let me explain that, Andrea, because it's not my idea. I was referring to Naomi Klein. You know,
right.
Naomi Klein?
Yeah.
So that's her point, and she called Obama the first super brand in politics.
Brand.
And so that was in her after the book. I was talking about her book, No Logo. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book.
Yeah,
it's
I read it.
20 years old.
Yeah.
I like the book very much, and it has a lot to do with prophelicity, right? Prophelicity is kind of sort of personal branding, so she talks a lot about the brand, right? And the notion of the brand is closely related to the notion of the profile. So she was saying what happened with the brand is that companies no longer really focus on the product that much, right? Starbucks, he was talking about Starbucks, coffee is like horrible in Starbucks, but it doesn't matter, right? Because it's all about the Starbucks brand, and the Starbucks, you can also call it the Starbucks profile, though I think the two notions are different, but leaving that aside. And then she said, and also the companies actually outsource everything. They don't even produce anything anymore, right? The core of the company only works on establishing the brand, right? And the whole production process, and that's all outsourced, and that's, you know, other companies do that for them. They don't care about that much anymore. It's just about curating the brand. So she said, we have reached something similar now, 10 years after she published No Logo, and said, we have something similar now in politics. And she referred to Obama as an example of that. That is, she called this kind of hollow politics, right? And we see this very clearly with the Democratic Party, where it's all about curating this very attractive image, right? Just like Starbucks has this kind of very appealing image, right? Even Starbucks here, even though the coffee is like horrible, and that it doesn't matter. And she said something similar is also happening, like really in politics, that all the efforts are put into creating this very kind of profile. And actually actual politics is actually outsourced as well. So it's a kind of a hollow politics. So the argument is even quite different from somewhat different from what you said. So she wasn't really criticizing Obama's politics, because Obama wasn't really, or the Democrats are not really anymore actually about politics. Politics has been outsourced. The dirty job is no longer being the core business. So politics is, and that is really the point, that politics is no longer in the traditional sense making politics. Just like in the economy, companies no longer produce actual things, they produce brands, and in politics it's exactly the same thing.
And I guess that ties into my next question. You mentioned now the economy and companies. So how is the economic structured then tied to identity building? So we said, democracy with authenticity, but in terms of the economy, how has capitalism accelerated or shaped prophilicity?
Yes, I'm exploring this kind of link between in recent thing. It's also in the book, but the book was now, because published now, it takes long. It was like finished a year ago or so. And it's after we finished the manuscript, I've been thinking more and more about exactly this link between prophilicity and economy. And I think it has a lot to do with capitalism and the general thing that we're seeing now, that of course, sincerity is very much class related, right? Obviously, right? Like, you have a certain allegiance to the social class or so you belong.
The great chain of being.
Well, I mean, just like, it's like the social, sincerity is committing to a certain social role you have. And the social role is kind of typically tied to a kind of social stratum that you belong to, an aristocratic stratum or the worker class.
That cannot be moved.
Yes, yeah. And of course, that's no longer the case. And then there is an authenticity, on the other hand, is also somehow related to, is kind of a bourgeois concept, right? So it's not commitment to the bourgeoisie or as a class, but you are, it's very much through this individualist thing. And I think we can see clearly that what happens in capitalism is that in recent decades is the disappearance of the economic foundation of the middle class. Right? Like, for instance, in the job that I am, in Macau, I still make a lot of money, but look everywhere else, the salaries of professors, right? They're moving closer and closer to the precariat if they get a job at all, right? You know how difficult it is to get a job at all. So it's very difficult to sell these kind of traditional political ideologies, either tied to sincerity or tied to authenticity. So, right, it's similar to what in fashion, right? Like whatever Nike or so, right? A Nike shirt is not really sold anymore to those people who now have a lot of money and thereby express that they've made it to, that they now have a solid job and now they can afford whatever and buy a car. And that's no longer how you can market in a world like this. So they market no longer on the basis of status symbols, because people don't really have a status.
Right.
And the status is always it's always somehow in danger, right? And so there's much more, but it's much more attractive to everyone. And it already starts with teenagers, of course, who are very much identity focused. The prophilicity really gets to the people who don't have to have much money, who don't have to have a steady job, who can be only 16 years old. They already have a desire for a profile. And they already, then politics is addressed to them in that same way how Nike addresses their products to them. So it becomes an attractive profile marker, and it doesn't really matter which social background you have, right? You can enrich your profile, you can increase your profile value even more so by being, a fan of Obama than by wearing a Nike shirt.
Yes, I remember when I've been using the internet since 1996, 1997, living in a very small town with not many people had internet. And I remember that connecting to chat was very interesting back then, just to see if you could connect with somebody from China. And then when the technology of the Internet of Things or whatever developed, the filling your profile was a very, it gave you
self-affirmation.
Yes. And how does goce?
Joy.
Yeah, it gave us joy. You had a place to put down your interests, your profile.
Yes.
And actually, as I've grown older, I've grown less interested in the profile because there is something sinister about it in a way. I've always felt that because it makes you do things. Like if you don't, in this interaction of profiles, if you don't do certain things, well, you're going against cosmic order, which is sort of what I don't know.
This sinister thing, right? I actually think that's a good thing to a certain extent. Because it was exactly the problem with sincerity and authenticity that the sinister side wasn't obvious. And and that brought a lot of problems. I think sincerity, obviously, has also been very bad effects. Yes. It allows you to shape identity. So in this sense, it's very good and it's necessary. But of course, it brings about, a lot of horrible things as well. Just think about the roles of women or other things, right? Oppression of whole classes and all these kinds of stuff, right? So the ethos of sincerity and this identity mode and this identity technology is also very sinister. And the same thing, of course, of authenticity, this whole cult of individualism, right? And that's also very sinister, right? And it has a lot to do, we talked about with earlier forms of capitalism and kind of this insistence on on private property, for instance, and so I think we now become much more easier. The sinister aspects of authenticity and sincerity become much more clear. And so we also see this obvious sinister aspects of profilicity. And I think that's, as I said, that's actually a good thing that we see the problems that are attached more clearly. The problems.
Yeah, and just a couple.
I would clean the word. I would take out sinister and just say maybe it's very ambivalent and paradoxical in a way.
Exactly. Yes.
I choose my ambivalence, so I don't fill up my profile that much. That's what I would say.
Right. That's a great potential, I think, in profilicity that we didn't really have in sincerity and authenticity, that we can approach our identity with, that we can understand this ambiguity, and thereby, it's what we call genuine pretending, have a more kind of relaxed relation towards our identity and identity in general.
Yeah.
So just a couple of examples from pop culture to kind of think about in terms of publicity and like the relation with authenticity. I'm going to use Leonardo DiCaprio because I couldn't come up with a better example. So Leonardo DiCaprio has said, for example, that he's like super into green energy and like, you know, save the planet. And but I mean, it could be Leonardo DiCaprio or it could be anybody else, right? That presents their profile as something, and then they are caught doing inauthentically the opposite. So Leonardo DiCaprio, I think, then hires private jets to fly to like his filming locations or whatnot. And then there was like this uproar when he was found out. But that would go more in line with the authenticity paradigm rather than the prophilic. So does that
of being a movie star and
of,
being able to do this?
Well, no, of saying, you know, I'm for green and sustainable and planet saving, whatever. But then he's caught doing the opposite. So he,
yeah, and I mean that's what we expect. But this is the same in all three models. You know, and the fakeness is equally like sincerity. People are also, most people are like super fake. I mean, China, they had this very strong emphasis throughout the history. I was just talking with a colleague about this, that you had to be a filial son in order to get a political job. So you had to prove how filial you are in order to become an official, right? And of course, everyone was like totally faking that. You had to have the reputation in the community. And so, and then of course in authenticity, right? And then you also have to be like super authentic. And most people, I mean, you can't be fully, it's like impossible to be fully authentic, right? Because of the ambivalence. And now the idea is you have to be like in the other things, you have to be, as we call it, you have to be invested in your profile, which means you have to back up your profile with the proper actions. And of course, people like regularly fail in it, but I don't think that's different from the other identity technologies. There's always the suspicion that someone is like insincere, insincerity, or non-authentic, or that someone is basically faking their profile.
I just have one more example, Andrei, to give you one second. So this just to give the contrast, the contrast to that, Marilyn Manson, you know, who's always portrayed himself as like the bad guy and like, you know, really into like sadomasochism and like, you know, wearing leather and like blood and whatever, right? Like this rock star.
Antichrist superstar,
right? So this, like, I mean, Marilyn Manson started in the 90s and he's maintained this persona for 2 decades. And then, I don't know if you heard this story, Georg, this year came out, like a bunch of women started accusing him of like, you know, basically acting his profile out in his private life, right? Of having this like kind of rape dungeon in his house, where, you know, he would put like whoever he was dating or sleeping with at the time and then use like all this kind of like, you know, weird torture devices on them and like, and actually being a complete manipulator and horrible guy. And, you know, then people were really surprised because they like, there was no expectation that he was actually, you know, bad guy.
Antichrist superstar.
So I thought it was quite, I mean, it's quite funny that like, you know, people were like, oh, but you know, that was your profile, but you're not meant to be that way.
Yes. That's interesting.
Well, actually what happens with him, I think it's double interesting, because when Bowling for Columbine, when Columbine happened, the Columbine shooting happened, everybody focused on him and on his profile, let's say, like, because what his profile said, then he's going to be this guy that he kind of turned out to be. And because he came out.
Sorry, I just want to ask, like, did the shooters there in Columbine say they were influenced by him or something?
They listened to his music.
They listened to his music, and he was. from the 90s, he was the most that to stand out because of the makeup and the
And people
theatrics
protested against his concerts, and like, in America, where like you can't play here, and like all these like super religious communities were like totally freaked out by this.
But he came out and he detached himself in a very Brechtian way. He said, I am not this. This is just my facade. This is, I am performing. But then he actually, via identification, I guess, Plato would say, he ended up being this thing that he or whatever, or he was always this. It doesn't really matter, because apparently what we are upset by is when it actually happens or when it doesn't. We want the absolute. We want Marilyn Manson to absolutely be Marilyn Manson when it fits us, and then we want to be. But then when he turns out to be exactly what we expected, or what he's supposed to be, we get upset.
But I think it's still like, that's also a good thing about the profile, that we are kind of aware of the borders of the profile, right? We would be kind of rightfully disappointed if we buy a ticket for a Marilyn Manson concert and then he sings songs by Joan Baez, right? Then we would be rightfully disappointed, and we could say that's a scandal and we want our money back. But the other things don't, because we know it's a profile, we still don't expect him, as these women did, and I think it makes some sense, that when they date him, that he starts torturing them in his basement or whatever he did. I don't know if he did that, right? So because they're not. That's like a different aspect, and so the profile identity. That's also what we try to highlight in the book, right? They are not exclusive. So you can have you have a sincere side, you have an authentic side, and you have a profile side. You can have all of them, and everyone has all of them, right? So it's actually we're kind of expected not to to be sincere when it's in a context where it's kind of that is functions on the basis of sincerity and so forth and so forth. And so of course in an intimate relationship with someone, you don't want them to just continue creating their profile with you. That makes no sense.
Right.
In this sense, when you say, and I find this very interesting, because sometimes when something new is born in terms of philosophy, a new concept, it wants to fight with other concepts, and you are just saying, no, this is what it is. Sometimes you go authentic or whatever, and in that sense, the dangers are also the same, or the dangers in terms of, because when you talk about the hollowness of it and the fakeness of it, of all three of them,
right,
I can't help to think that when that goes to a radical extent, to say it has to do with our relationship with reality and how we can lose a kind of perspective. And in that sense, what I meant before of saying my profile, or by feeling my profile is making me do things, just as my authentic self would make me do things if I am set in saying, I am this, I am supposed to do this, in all the three of them, in all the three technologies. What do you think?
Yeah, I think society is getting increasingly complex, and identity is getting increasingly complex, and it's more like, as I said, just to continue with this, like you know, in a relationship, you must learn to be somehow authentic, maybe, and most people are. And in when you, whatever, in your relationship to your parents, you know, then you expect some form of sincerity, and you have to operate in this mode. Or when you go to the clinic and see a doctor, or so, right? And then, of course, in other areas nowadays, prophylicity is like super important. And so it's not only that there is, as you said, like that there is the dark side, there's also the good side about it, right? And it allows us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do without these technologies, right? When there was only sincerity, you couldn't really be authentic. And then the authenticity was created, and then you could be both authentic in certain contexts and sincere in others. And now we can also be prophilic. And then, you know, that's also what that allows for a lot of things to happen that otherwise couldn't happen, right? I mean, we give the example, I was also giving that when, you know, when you're choosing your Airbnb place to stay, right? You're looking at all of these profiles, and then you don't really want to know the host authentically, right? That's I only have like whatever 2 days to stay there, and then don't want to have like an authentic or even not a sincere relationship, right? You want just, you know, that the profile of the place is kind of confirmed, that it's okay, and so forth. And this is so it has a high functional value, and we apply it in our lives. And as long as it's kind of kept in its place, then it also functions very well.
Just one more paradoxical kind of example that Andrea brought to my attention of Mexican pop culture that I was not aware of. So this woman,
Eva Rojas,
became viral, but the reason that she became viral was not because, well, she thought of herself to be beautiful or attractive and a good actress, but she became viral because, according to the viewers, or how you call them, the general peer, she was completely delusional. So she became popular because the people watching her were like, oh my God, she's absolutely not attractive, absolutely not a good actress, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the question there is, who defines what our profile is? Is it meant to be a dialogue between us and the general peer, or is this an example of some pathological profile or a profile gone wrong?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not familiar with this example. So she's just a YouTuber or something?
Yeah, YouTuber, TikToker.
I see. Yeah.
Now
that's
TikToker.
Interesting. Yeah. Are you sure? So she basically made a fool of herself.
Yes, I was thinking during the time we've been together of this example, and I am also wondering her links to authenticity there,
right.
Not only of profile, because she's not. I don't think she's very good at fixing herself as a brand, which is part of the, or could be more towards the world of profiling. Of prophylicity, I mean.
But she has a profile now.
I think from how you explained it, she's like a comical figure, like a carnivalesque figure. And of course, these always are like the buffon in Italian. You have something in Spanish like this? The buffon.
Yeah, buffon.
Yes, the buffoon, yes. Right? And you have that in sincerity too, right? A lot. The people who think like, and then they become, you know, the king, who thinks he's like, well, you know, and then is in fact he's just a total joke, right, or something like this.
I think
and of course you have it in authenticity as well, right? The people who think like they're so special and they're so unique, and so that's great comedy material.
Yeah,
because comedy is incongruity. So comedy is always based on incongruity. And of course, then we talked about this ambiguity, and then ambiguities, maybe you mentioned that, becomes more obvious. So yeah, that's great. So there's a lot of space there for this kind of practical comedy, seems.
I mean, she's not aware that she's being comic or
Yeah, that's
Is that
funny.
possible? Is that possible that she's
Well,
really not aware of
that's
that? If
well,
you are
I
aware of
think
it,
I've thought about that as well as in terms of the meta theatrics of what could be installed there, that she could, that yeah, she could be aware and exploit it, and that would be working to her advantage. Yes, that I do believe that is a possibility, but also I think that she could be just in so involved and alienated just in the fact that she has views and
Mm-hmm.
comments which are mostly positive, because that's part of this like ouroboros that doesn't break, which is people would
but it's a practical comedy.
comment
Yeah.
positively, so this
But that's
comedy
also
doesn't
ironic,
stop.
right?
Yeah.
They only
Yes.
comment positively to continue the joke.
Yeah. But then my question remains. So who defines then more important, like what our profile is? So if we are successful
Mhm.
at our profile, then we understand what is wanted from us, right? In order to become
Yes,
more
again,
visible.
but this is the same in all technologies.
Yeah.
That, of course, that you are a sincere mother and your motherhood is confirmed within the family by everyone else in your social group. Who then, and then we have in authenticity, you talk a lot about philosophy, we have the big concept of recognition, right? That's the recognition is exactly the authenticity yearns for recognition, which comes from the other, right?
Mhm.
So there is no authenticity without recognition, just as there is no sincerity without confirmation of your role. Yeah, if you are not, and this is why people, we have also a section on this, a major reason for suicide, particularly there's an interesting study about suicide in China. We talk about, where typically until like 20 years ago at least, often in the rural areas, people, whatever, the old man killed himself because the younger people didn't give him properly soup. They didn't put enough soup in his, so they didn't treat him as they show him the respect, and therefore that an elderly people in a community is supposed to be shown, and therefore his identity was destroyed, right? So he's not respected. Like in authenticity, if you're not experiencing recognition, then your authenticity, and this is why people often kill themselves in authenticity context, right? Because they can't find recognition. And of course, in sincerity, also, that was what you brought up, the profile must be validated by the general peer. The unseen profile is worth nothing, right? So the validation of the profile corresponding to recognition and authenticity and what we could call respect in sincerity is and that's what we yearn for. Just as we yearn for recognition, we yearn for the validation of the profile. I mean, I'm very much concerned also about the number of viewers of my YouTube channel. I'm just, I'm not posting a certain video and then it's going to be edited and so forth, right? Because of course I also the number of views and the reactions and the comments validate the profile.
Your right, and your identity in
Yeah,
the
exactly.
end
Yeah.
term. And is it, sorry, for instance, can there be, or I will invite you to think this, a sort of drama between the body that embodies sincerity, well, the three technologies, which is all of us, in terms of, for instance, like my in the like where I am authentic, I get recognized and I am validated there, and in the same way in my family as my role as a daughter or whatever, or as a sibling, but my profile is dead, unseen, and I am trying to make it work, but it's not happening, because I also, I mean, I'm actually speaking of biographically in a way, which
Yes.
is because I also stopped working on my profile because like I figured this out, like it's expecting me to do things, but also because I realized that I didn't have time enough to invest in it to get what I wanted out of my profile. And I don't want that drama. I don't want to get frustrated through that by investing more time and not getting it, which I
Yeah, but
find,
then you need something else. Then you need either
yeah,
recognition by your authentic friends, or you get
or
respect from your kids,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you neither have kids nor friends, at least you can have a profile, and the other way
Yeah.
around.
Just,
Yes. No, sorry. Go ahead, Rita.
just a question about related to this. So, like, what about the likes of, for example, people who have curated their entire lives around a particular profile or cause of, like, for example, Greta Thunberg?
Yeah.
That everything surrounds, like, their identity is
Yes.
focused in this one thing. So that in a way, you know, if we could, if you know, tomorrow we had like a sustainable planet, I think she would collapse.
What are you gonna do?
Like, you know, what happens then? Is there not enough?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's funny, right? It's just like, you know, whatever, some kind of religious figure. Like, this is a millennial thing about the whole environmental movement, right? Like, it's just, you have these millennialists who, you know, who say, okay, in 3 years from now the world will end, right? And that works great until like 3 years, right? And then here's something similar thing, right? If you know, it would somehow turn out, whatever, global warming somehow fizzles out and everything gets colder or so, and then yeah, then no more Greta Thunberg. Yeah, that would be very bad for her profile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, that's an absurdity. That's an interesting absurdity or an interesting paradox. And we talk about this in the book in one or two instances. Actually, exactly this thing, this one example, which is a real example. One of my best friends who is super ecological, right? So there was like this hoax a while ago. Not hoax. There was, how was this? There was somehow that global warming wasn't really taking place.
That it was a hoax.
Yeah, and then they somehow found out, no, it's actually taking place. And for him, this was a great relief that it's actually taking place somehow, right? Because it confirmed, like, which is normal. It's like for all of us, right? It's like, you know, on the other way around, like, whatever, you know, you're Islamophobe and hate Muslims or so, and then you find out that there weren't any terrorist attacks this month or so. That's very disappointing, right? Because it somehow it really threatens your profile, right? You invested so much personal identification into whatever, the environment movement and global warming, and then or you invested so much, like, profile stuff in being anti-Islam or so, and then the cause is somehow is somehow no longer valid, and that means you feel it personally. Because and that's exactly the point. It's about the internalization and the inevitable. That's always the case, and no matter which model you have, that these causes are always internalized, personalized, and that's what we see always, right? So there is no cause without, let's say, then it's called whatever, this narcissism or something, which is wrong, because it's always like, once the stronger you identify with the cause, people say it's, oh, these people, they sacrifice themselves for the cause, but it's not the case. They internalize the cause, and you could also say they, at the same time, they exploit the cause just to build an identity,
right,
just to have an identity. And you can't distinguish between the two. It's just, Luhmann would say, it depends on the observer. Either you can say, oh, it's the same thing, them sacrificing themselves for the cause, dedicating themselves fully to the cause, or just exploiting the cause for their own vanity.
Right.
And the two things, it's exactly the same phenomenon. It's just two different descriptions of the same phenomenon, because the two things are totally combined. And that is now that's now no different with prophelicity than it was with sincerity or authenticity. The mechanism is still exactly the same. And again, that's why I'm always cautious, like that's also a Daoist thing, about people who dedicate themselves fully to their causes. The more they dedicate themselves to their causes, for me, that's always, as it would be for Nietzsche, a sign of great suspicion.
My last question has to do with one of the last things you mentioned when you did the introduction of the contents of your book, which is how to, I don't remember how you phrased it, but as a person from theater, it's kind of realizing that you are acting in a way. And it's also what I find interesting as while you were explaining the whole process of prophelicity and this outcome that could be just realize that you are performing something at some time and you are just doing this, that in a way it kind of also accompanies in a parallel with the development of theater technology and acting technology and what through the ages, but particularly the 20th century, the theater has been reflecting upon itself, which is everything that Brecht said about identification, for instance, which is no, the actor must never become fully immersed with the character. It must always, well, this thing. I just find very interesting that I can draw a parallel to this, which is what you propose, if I understand correctly, with you and your co-author propose, is the way to go, which is just let's agree we are acting for ourselves and for the other and for the universe in a way.
Right. The Brecht's notion of the distancing effect, right? The Verfremdungseffect. This was what you were talking about. That's interesting, and it actually has to do with Chinese theater, so we wrote about that as well, because I think it's important for some old Daoist texts that we've been working with. And so the Verfremdungseffect, the distancing effect, that allows us basically to see the incongruity or the ambiguity of any form of identity, right? So, and that's, I think, very interesting that Brecht wanted to kind of show that, so that we have a critical perspective on these identities that are performed there in front of our eyes, and that also allows the actors to build some sort of distance to their roles, right? On the other hand, so as you said, like we see that all these roles are performed, but still we develop, of course, a certain sense of genuineness and must do so, right? So all these forms allow us to develop some form of selfhood, of identity, right? Again, like, doesn't matter if you identify as a mother, and then through this sincere role, you build up a very strong sense of identity. And you can do it like authentically, or you can like totally be invested in your profile, and that gives you a source to build up, which it doesn't exist before. So the simple idea of the notion of genuine pretending, which is what this is about for us, is that everyone is genuinely pretending all the time. That is the existential condition of being. Everyone is genuinely pretending, which means they are performing, and through the performance, they achieve some form of identity that appears genuine both to themselves and others. And of course, the whole point is, and that's again why the Verfremdungseffect is important, that you somehow develop an awareness of that, so that you don't get carried away, so that you don't over-identify, which leads to all kinds of problems, not only in theater, but more problematically in real life. This is kind of the grounds like fundamentalism, right? When you over-identify with your roles and the over-identifying mother or the over-identifying child. I mean, you do a lot of psychoanalysis in your videos, so I always like that, right? And I think just a lot of these pathologies, and this is how we understand Daoism, Paul and I, is that it kind of sees the pathologies almost in a psychoanalytic sense of that necessarily result when we over-identify. And so the insight into the existential condition of genuine pretending has a very thorough therapeutic effect. So that's the actual, maybe the most important message of our book, actually. So ultimately, our book has this kind of Taoist therapeutic approach, and that has a lot to do with the Verfremdungseffect you brought up.
I am very interested of getting the book and passing it on to students in the concepts, because I think in terms of acting and for actors and actresses to continue, analyzing and reflecting on these theories of identity is very important, because that is, the matter that theater works with. Right. That you mustn't, identity as a pharmacon as well. It can go both ways. It can heal you, or it can be therapeutic, or it can kill you.
Right. Yes. It's a thin.
So that would be me.
It's a very, very, very thin line between the two, and we're always negotiating. Yes. And then, of course, traditionally, that's again what I like about prophelicity, that the pressure of genuineness is very dangerous in sincerity and authenticity. We are somehow expected to overcommit and to achieve a genuineness that is no longer pretended. We don't want to know. We want to somehow erase. We want to blind ourselves to the fact that we are performing. Right, the performance is always that is scandalous. We want not to confess the fact that we're all performing, and then we commit ever more to sincerity and become a more and more rigorous mother, or we commit more and more to authenticity and become a more and more fanatic individualist, right? And similar, of course, in prophelicity. But in prophelicity, it's kind of much easier to actually prevent this overcommitment, because prophelicity is somehow much more open about the pretending aspect of identity. It becomes, that's what I like about prophelicity. And it's not.
I have another question now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you just said this. You want. You become more invested in the identification, and he or she who does this wants the other to do exactly that.
Yes.
And in that way, since we're talking about, or I am in a way of theater, and in that way fiction, I do see a parallel between these two in terms of the special effects, for instance. There's been, there is a cry from this side, from the ones that we just sit and watch, that is, this must be real. The problem between reality and truth, or what, I don't know how Aristotle puts it in the Poetics, but it's the truthness of fiction, which is not true. It's not truth for real. It's just as truth as it can get, because it's mimesis, it's imitation. but there is like there's a resistance that I would link to over identification, which is a resistance to just to see fiction, just to see that this is not from real life or something like this. I don't know if I made myself clear.
Yeah, I think in theater, right? That's like a big metaphor. Like also the sociologist Goffman used it, right? We can understand on the basis of prophelicity that, of course, we're all playing theater also in our real life. So there's only a gradual difference between theater as an art form and a performance of identity in a non-artistic way, but in everyday life. This is also a performance. It's a different kind of performance as in theater, but the basic structure is actually kind of similar, or is similar, or is even the same, right? So theater is in a way the insight into, and it's a practice, an artistic practice of genuine pretending. It makes the condition of human existence, which is genuine pretending, into an art form, which is what art does, right? This is basically theater is the artistic manifestation of the existential condition of enacting identity in actual life.
Well, perhaps that is why it's in such a critical crisis in the past 40 years, because I do think there is a huge wave of over-identification in the big picture of our social life, and in that way, the movies, for instance, the movies they give you, cinema can provide a much safer environment for the fantasy of this absoluteness that we look for, and
well,
this
not only
genuine.
It's bad for theater, but it has to do with the emergence of the new media, right? It's boring to go see a theater. It's much more now. We have forms like music videos, right? It's so popular. Like, I mean, Andrea and we often exchange music videos. That's also theater. That's a new form of theater. And that has like a massive audience, like billions of people watch music videos, but that's a new form of theater.
You do think that through this very spectacular way of presenting something, genuine pretending can still occur?
Genuine pretending is an existential condition of human existence. It's impossible for it not to occur. It's
right?
It's always there, and it just in theater, including its now new forms of theatric performances, like music videos. That was just an idea I developed in the conversation with you right now. Could be understood as basically an art form which makes the genuine pretending visible and therefore is somehow enjoyable. But
Just about the genuine pretending, the way you've described it before, Georg, and also in relation to the Zhuangzi, there seems to be an implicit lightness of attitude, right? And that I think I like lightness in terms of like, not this serious overcommitment to an identity or to a cause, but for it to be like, I don't know, it just feels lighter. And I was wondering, how would you link that to the use of humor or not taking oneself too seriously, and if that's also part of the therapeutic aspect of genuine?
Exactly. Yeah, that's very essential to it. So humor is very essential to that, right? So that also ties directly into the theater thing, right? It's the comedy performance. As we said earlier, that was an interesting example that you gave, right? I think that's the YouTuber who pretends to be beautiful but actually isn't beautiful, and everyone plays that kind of continuous joke, and that's a lot of fun. And so that shows basically the same thing, right? That once we sort of playfully approach identity and very much act in an awareness of its ambiguity, then this is somehow prevents us with relief, with ease, with joy. And that's a function of humor. And so I think really like philosophy and humor and genuine pretending, and that they are closely connected, and we need maybe much more like a philosophy of humor, right? I mean, that you see this now we see that again, like all kinds of religious fundamentalism tend to erase humor, right? There was the idea that in the Middle Ages that Jesus never laughed, and of course now we have whatever in Islam that you can't have a cartoon. And of course now we have these philosophers with all these woke philosophers writing articles what we all cannot make jokes about, and that's all the same thing, right? That we have this move towards fundamentalism and somehow expelling humor, limiting humor, right? And expelling, out of the, giving like really very rigorously, regulating and excluding it. That was excluding it, giving it only like a certain kind of a space at the side, right? Particularly in philosophy and religion. And that's very pathological. It's highly pathological. And again, Nietzsche tries to do the exact opposite. And that's really, I think, it's a major issue, and I think a major problem that is inherent to philosophy and religion. And Nietzsche saw that very well. And we need a kind of a new Nietzscheanism to bring that back, because it's very much threatened at this point in time. There's a crisis of humor, and there's persecution of humor. It has gone that far.
Well, yes, because you cannot laugh at somebody else's identity. That is the thing that you cannot. And what else are you going to laugh at? I mean, that's one of the things, the great things Bergson says in his essay on laughter, that he says, we are not only what Aristotle says, which is the animal that laughs, but we make laugh. It's just, we are risible. How do you say this in English? We are laughable. Yes. We are laughable. We not only do we laugh, we are laughable. And excluding the ridiculousness of our profile or our authentic self or our sincere self leads to, well,
bad
violence.
comedy and bad comedy. Well, like I was going to say that like, I don't know if Andrea, if you would agree with me on this, but that's when you limit comedy so much to certain topics or to what is appropriate or politically correct, you get pretty stiff comedy of the likes, in my view, of like Stephen Colbert and Trevor Noah, and like, which I don't really find that funny, because it's like, it's very formulaic. Right. Whereas
actually there's a thing that there's something with, I do like Stephen Colbert. I find him funny. I do find him funny.
Yes.
Trevor, but for instance, there's a relationship there that I can't believe the woke people haven't attacked, which is his relationship with John Baptiste.
What's
like? Well, that the white man is in the center and the music man is a black man. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I mean,
I have thought about it. I thought it was,
I don't know if it's just in my black head.
No, I thought about it before. I thought it was quite like, I had the same thought as you. I was like, I can't believe nobody has said anything about this.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It does limit. I mean, yeah, I would agree with you. It does make it stiff and
It was just
whatnot.
like, I don't know, for the past 4 years, it was all about Donald Trump and how Donald Trump
Yeah,
failed,
yeah,
and how
yeah,
Donald Trump
yeah,
did, and how Donald Trump. And I was like, really? Is that all you've got for comedy?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
sad.
Well, but that it's part of it. Well, I'm sorry, but from the get-go, yeah, comedy has to do with laughing at he who is in power. And
Sure.
in that
Sure,
sense,
no, I
when
understand that. I understand that. But like, I
but
just
that's
found it
what
a
they
bit.
said, because when Obama was president, that's also what they said. Like, political comedy was terrible
Yeah.
because he didn't slip as much. He was
Yes.
actually very solid in all of his ways of presenting himself.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah,
when
but now, I mean,
when
like,
he slipped.
Biden is also like basically a joke in many ways, right? But then you probably can't really make jokes about him because he's at the same time, his profile is managed so well, so that he's like on the kind of very much on the woke side, right?
But even when he did something quite funny, I think it was 2 weeks ago, he fell and then he fell again and then he fell again. And
Yes,
if it had been
yes.
Donald Trump, oh my God, like all these comedy guys would have not like it would have like a heyday with him.
Of
And
course,
what
of
did Civil
course.
Cover do was like, oh, look at Fox making fun of Biden. But
Yes,
really, the
yes.
important thing was that weekend. I was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, but that's because laughter is moralized.
yeah,
That's the
well,
problem.
that was my point.
That's what Bakhtin says. It says our problem is that we have moralized comedy, laughter, and now if we laugh at someone, we are destroying.
Yes.
There is no point, there is no possibility of building, and that is sad because it's not in the spirit of comedy to do so. The spirit of comedy is to rejoice in the fact that we are all fools.
Exactly. Yes.
Here.
Yes.
I think we should end on that note.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening. You and Your Profile, Identity After Authenticity by Hans-Georg Moeller and Paul D'Ambrosio is now available for purchase on Amazon. Hans-Georg Moeller also has 2 YouTube channels, Carefree Wandering and Philosophy in Motion, with its Spanish version, Filosofia en Movimiento. Please find the links below. We are in Xochitl, and you can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at IXIC Podcast. That is IXIC Podcast. Or you can drop us an email at ixicpodcast@gmail.com.